My name is Nadine. I'm 31. I'm a forensic accountant at a mid-size litigation support firm in Columbus, Ohio. The person they call when someone claims the money just disappeared. I've traced embezzled funds through 4 shell companies and a cryptocurrency wallet registered in the Cayman Islands. I've sat across from CFOs who make 6 figures and watched them sweat through their collar when I open my binder. So when my mother sat across from me at a family dinner last Thanksgiving, in front of 22 relatives, and announced that I owed her $86,400 in back rent adjustments, on top of the $1,200 a month she'd already been charging me since I was 16, I didn't flinch. I set my fork down, I folded my napkin into a perfect square, and I opened the binder I'd been carrying in my tote bag for 3 years, waiting for exactly this moment. My mother had always loved round numbers. She just hadn't counted on me being the person who audits them. Welcome back to Karma's Keeper, where the ones they underestimated are always the ones keeping the records. If you've ever had a family member treat your paycheck like their personal checking account, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. But let me take you back 15 years, to the fall I turned 16, to a split-level house on Deerfield Road in Mansfield, Ohio, and the evening my mother first sat me down and explained what family really costs. I grew up in a house where the dishwasher had been broken since 2009, but my mother's acrylic nails were filled every 2 weeks without fail. The carpet in the hallway had a stain in the shape of Lake Erie that nobody ever cleaned because nobody in that house fixed things, they just adjusted around the broken parts and called it normal. My stepfather, Greg, drove a leased Silverado he washed every Sunday morning. My younger half-brother, Tyler, had a gaming setup in his bedroom that cost more than my college savings, which, I should clarify, was $0. My mother, Linda, worked the 3 to 11 shift at a fulfillment center and came home smelling like cardboard and packing tape, and even as a child I understood that her exhaustion was real. What I didn't understand, not yet, was that real exhaustion doesn't entitle you to someone else's paycheck. My biological father left when I was 4. I have exactly one memory of him, the smell of motor oil, and a voice saying, "Be good for your mom, Deanie." I was good. I was so good it became my entire identity. Good meant quiet. Good meant helpful. Good meant absorbing the silence at the dinner table when Greg and my mother argued about credit card bills, and then clearing the plates without being asked, because good girls clear the plates. By 12, I was cooking dinner 3 nights a week. Hamburger helper, baked chicken thighs, spaghetti with jarred sauce. I was 12, and standing on a step stool to reach the spice cabinet, and nobody seemed to find that unusual. By 14, I was babysitting Tyler every Friday and Saturday night, so my mother and Greg could drive to the casino in Sandusky. They'd leave at 7 and come back at 2 in the morning, and I'd be on the couch doing algebra homework by the light of infomercials. They never paid me. When I asked, just once, I was 14 and had seen a pair of sneakers that cost $45. My mother looked at me over her coffee mug and said, "Babysitting your own brother isn't a job, Nadine. It's called being a family." She said the word family, the way some people say, obviously, like a door being closed. I got my first real job the month I turned 16, a part-time bookkeeping assistant at a tax preparation office called Harmon & Wise, in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a Subway. $12 an hour, 20 hours a week. My boss, Mr. Harmon, was a quiet man with reading glasses that sat crooked on his nose, and a habit of tapping his pen against his coffee mug when he was thinking. He wore the same 3 ties in rotation, navy, maroon, and a green one his granddaughter had given him that he wore every Friday without exception. On my first day, he handed me a paper ledger and said, "Before you touch the software, you learn the logic. If the numbers don't lie, neither should we." He taught me double-entry accounting the old way, debits on the left, credits on the right, and every transaction has 2 sides. I loved it immediately and completely. I loved that columns either balanced or they didn't. There was no room for, "Well, that depends," or "It's complicated," or "That's just how family works." The arithmetic was honest, even when the people weren't. I was good at it. Mr. Harmon told me so after the 2nd week, and it was the first time in my life that being good at something felt like it belonged to me instead of to someone else's convenience. 2 weeks after my first paycheck, $384, deposited into a savings account my mother had opened in both our names. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table after Greg and Tyler had gone to bed. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, the same kind of legal pad I'd later use in depositions to track opposing counsel's claims. She'd written a list in her careful block letters, each item underlined once. Rent, $800. Utilities, $200. Food, $200. That's $1,200 a month, Nadine. I stared at the pad. I was making roughly $960 a month before taxes. After taxes, closer to $820. Mom, that's more than I make. She tapped the legal pad with her acrylic nail. The click of it on the paper was precise, rhythmic, like a metronome. Then you'll need to pick up more hours, won't you? This is how the real world works, sweetheart. I'm not going to send you out there unprepared. I'm teaching you responsibility. Sweetheart. She always used that word when the number was about to go up. Greg was sitting in the living room. I could see the back of his head over the couch, the glow of the television on the wall behind him. He didn't turn around. He never turned around. His silence wasn't neutrality. It was the signature on a contract he'd already agreed to. I understood that later, when I learned how cosigners work. I want to be precise about something, because precision is what I do and it matters here. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my door or call a friend or write an angry journal entry. I went to my room, sat on my twin bed with the quilt my grandmother had made before she died, and opened a black and white composition notebook, the kind you buy at the dollar store for 99 cents, with the marbled cover and the wide ruled pages. On the first line, I wrote the date in blue ballpoint. Below it, I wrote, 1200 Malther, Mom says rent. And below that, a question I didn't fully understand yet, but felt in my ribs was important. I am 16. Is this legal? That composition notebook became my second spine. Every payment I made, I logged. Date, amount, method. Cash left on the kitchen counter in an envelope with Mom written on the front. Venmo transfers when she finally got the app in 2019. Checks written to Linda Brewer, because she wouldn't accept them, made out to cash. She wanted her name on them, wanted the paper trail to look voluntary. I didn't know why that mattered to her then. I know now. Every entry, in my careful teenage handwriting that slanted slightly left, then later in the cramped upright print I developed in college, while taking notes too fast during cost accounting lectures. I picked up more hours. I worked Saturdays. I worked school breaks. I missed junior prom because I was covering a Saturday shift for a coworker named Deshawn, and the $96 I'd earn was the difference between making my mother's number and falling short. My friend Keely sent me a photo of her and her boyfriend under the balloon arch, and I set my phone face down on the counter at Harmon & Wise and went back to reconciling a client's quarterly receipts, pretending my hands weren't shaking. When I fell short, and there were months I fell short, especially in winter when hours got cut, my mother added the balance to a running total she kept on the refrigerator, written on a whiteboard in red dry erase marker. The whiteboard was magnetic, stuck to the fridge with 2 clips shaped like ladybugs. Every time I opened the refrigerator for a glass of water, I saw my debt in red numbers. By the time I graduated high school, that whiteboard said I owed her $4,340 in back balance. Tyler, meanwhile, paid nothing. Tyler was 13 by then and had never been asked to pay rent, buy groceries, or contribute to a single utility bill. He had a PlayStation 5, a 60-inch television in his bedroom, and a mini fridge stocked with energy drinks. When I pointed this out, carefully, neutrally, the way I'd later present audit findings to partners, my mother said, "Tyler's a child, Nadine." I said, "I was his age when I started cooking dinner for this family." She said, "That's different. You were mature for your age." Mature for your age. The most expensive compliment a child can receive. They charge you adult prices and give you a child's authority. And when you try to point out the discrepancy, they act like the maturity itself is proof that you can handle it. Mr. Harmon noticed I was working too many hours. He asked me about it one afternoon while I was reconciling a client's quarterly statements, the adding machine tape curling off the desk and onto the floor. I told him the truth. Not because I trusted easily, but because accountants understand obligations, and I needed someone who spoke the same language as the numbers in my notebook. He took off his crooked glasses, cleaned them on his maroon tie, and said, "Nadine, there's a difference between an obligation and an extraction. One builds equity, the other just bleeds." I wrote that in my composition notebook too. Page 27. I can still tell you the page number. I graduated high school with a 3.7 GPA, an acceptance to Ohio State's accounting program with a partial scholarship, and a composition notebook that was 43 pages full. I'd paid my mother $27,600 by the time I walked across that stage, tracked to the penny. My mother told the extended family at my graduation party, held in the backyard with a sheet cake from Walmart, that she'd invested in my future. She said this while holding a paper plate of potato salad, and two of my aunts nodded along. She did not mention the $27,600. She did mention, twice, that I should be grateful. I moved out the week after graduation. My mother called me 6 times that first month, not once to ask how I was settling in, whether my dorm room was comfortable, whether I'd made friends. Every call was about money. When was I sending this month's payment? Had I forgotten that I still owed the back balance? Did I think leaving the house meant I stopped being her daughter? The calls lasted between 4 and 11 minutes. I timed them the way I time everything, not out of cruelty, but because measurement is how I keep the world from tilting. I kept paying. Through college, working part-time at a campus bookstore, and full-time every summer. Through my internship at a regional accounting firm, where I ate ramen 4 nights a week so the numbers would balance. Through the first 3 years of my career at a forensic accounting firm in Columbus, where I sat in glass-walled conference rooms tracing other people's missing money, while $1,200 of my own disappeared every month into my mother's account. Never missed, not once. Because that was the deal, and I am someone who honors her debts, even the ones that shouldn't exist. By 28, I had paid my mother $172,800. I knew the exact number because I had never stopped writing in composition notebooks. I was on my 7th one. I kept them in a fireproof lockbox in my apartment closet, next to my passport and my CPA certificate. Same level of importance, same category of evidence. Then, in March of last year, I got a call from my cousin, Bria. Bria is 3 years younger than me, my Aunt Patrice's daughter, and the only person in the family who ever looked at me like I was a person instead of a budget line item. She's a dental hygienist in Akron, has a rescue greyhound named Pencil, and once drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to bring me chicken soup when I had the flu. She called from her car, and I could hear the windshield wipers going and her breath coming fast, like she'd been running. "Nadine, I need to tell you something, and you're going to want to sit down." She told me she'd been at my mother's house helping set up for Tyler's 24th birthday party. While looking for extra folding chairs in the basement, she'd pulled open a filing cabinet, the beige metal kind with the dented bottom drawer. Inside it were bank statements, years of them, printed and organized by month in manila folders, each labeled with the year in my mother's block handwriting. My mother had a separate savings account at a credit union across town. The statements showed regular deposits matching the exact amounts I'd been paying, on the exact dates, but the account wasn't labeled household expenses or rent contributions. The account was titled Linda and Greg's Retirement Fund, Nadine Contributions. My name, in the account title, on a retirement fund I was never told about, never agreed to, and had no access to. My mother had been depositing my rent payments into a private retirement account for 15 years. Every dollar I thought was going to the mortgage, the electric bill, the water, redirected. The household ran on Greg's income and my mother's fulfillment center paycheck. My money was never needed. It was just taken. I didn't speak for 11 seconds. I counted them. Counting is what I do when the room tilts and I need to find the level again. "Bria," I said, "did you take pictures?" "Every page, front and back." I used my phone's scanner app. They're time-stamped. I set the phone face down on my kitchen counter and looked at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me, and it didn't. Something inside me had gone very still, the way a balance sheet goes still when you finally find the entry that's been throwing everything off for months. Not anger, not even betrayal, exactly. recognition. The books had never balanced because they were never meant to. If you've ever had a moment where the betrayal isn't a surprise but a confirmation, where you realize you've known the answer for years and were just waiting for the proof to surface, you know exactly how that stillness feels. Stay with me. Subscribe, because you'll want to see how this lands. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I did what I've been trained to do since Mr. Harmon put that paper ledger in front of me at 16. I opened a new composition notebook, number 8, and I wrote a header on the first page in the same blue ballpoint I've used since the beginning. Audit. L. Brewer Rent Scheme, 2009 to 2024. Below it, I started building the case the way I build every case at the firm. Documents first, emotions later, conclusions only after every column has been verified twice. Over the next 6 months, I reconstructed the entire payment history. Every notebook entry, every Venmo receipt, every canceled check I could pull from my bank's archive. I requested my own bank records going back to 2009 and cross-referenced them against Bria's photographs. I built a spreadsheet with 180 rows, one for each month, and color-coded it: green for confirmed match, yellow for estimated, red for discrepancy. The numbers matched within $340 across 15 years. The gap was 3 months, where I'd paid in cash, and my mother had apparently skimmed before depositing the remainder. Even in her scheme, she'd skimmed. The total I had paid, $172,800. The total in my mother's retirement account, attributable to my payments, $168,420, plus $45,580 in accumulated interest and modest market returns. Her account balance, as of the most recent statement Bria photographed, $214,000. She and Greg had contributed almost nothing of their own. Less than $6,000 over 15 years, mostly in the early months before my payments became large enough to fund the deposits alone. I also pulled county tax records for the Deerfield Road property. My mother's mortgage payment was $743 a month. Total utilities, electric, gas, water, internet, averaged $310. Combined household cost, $1,053 per month. My $1,200 monthly payment had been covering more than the entire household cost, and none of it had gone to the household. Not $1. I compiled everything into a binder. White, 3-ring, 2 inches thick. Tabbed sections with color-coded dividers. Payment history, bank records, credit union statements, mortgage and utility records, legal research, correspondence. I added a summary page at the front, printed in 12-point Times New Roman, with 1 line in bold at the bottom. Total extracted from Nadine Brewer, age 16 to 31, $172,800. Total applied to household expenses, 0.000. I also consulted an attorney named Dana Pryor, who specialized in family financial disputes. She reviewed the binder in her office on a Tuesday afternoon, turning pages with the deliberate patience of someone who reads documents for a living. After 40 minutes, she said I likely had a civil claim for unjust enrichment and possibly constructive fraud, given that the payments were extracted from a minor, under false pretenses, and continued through a pattern of deception. She also said something I wrote in the margin of Notebook 8. The legal case is solid, Nadine. But the family case, that's the one that'll cost you, and I'm not talking about billable hours. My therapist, Dr. Achebe, asked me the same week what I wanted from the confrontation. Not legally, emotionally. What outcome would let me set the binder down and leave it closed? I sat in her office, a small room with a Norfolk Island pine in the corner that she'd been growing since graduate school, with the binder on my lap, and said, I want her to know that I know, not because it changes the number, because I'm tired of being the only person in the room who's done the math. Then came Thanksgiving. My mother hosts every year, 22 people this time. Aunts, uncles, cousins including Bria, Greg's sister Donna and her husband Keith, Tyler and his girlfriend Jess, and 4 children under 8 who ran through the hallways like evidence scattering from a file. My mother had been calling me more frequently in the weeks leading up, her voice carrying that particular warmth she uses when she wants something, the honey and steel voice, the same tone she used the night she first slid that yellow legal pad across the kitchen table. I drove 2 hours from Columbus on Thanksgiving morning, with the binder on the passenger seat, in a canvas tote bag, next to my purse. I'd also brought composition notebook number 1, the marbled dollar store cover, the wide-ruled pages, the first entry in blue ballpoint, 1,200 methers. Mom says rent. I hadn't decided if I'd need it. I brought it the way some people bring a photograph. Proof that the person I was at 16 existed, and that she kept records. The house smelled like brown sugar, canned cranberry sauce, and the specific brand of plug-in air freshener my mother has used since 2011. The front porch light was still on the wrong timer. There were folding chairs crammed around 2 tables pushed together in the dining room, covered with a tablecloth that had small turkeys on it. The same tablecloth from every Thanksgiving I could remember, washed so many times the turkeys had faded to ghosts. My mother greeted me at the door in a new blouse, tags still on the inside of the sleeve. I noticed, because I notice everything that has a price. The first 2 hours were what they always are, controlled warmth. My mother introducing me to Donna's husband Keith as my Nadine, the accountant. She gets that from me, you know. Which is an interesting claim from a woman who has never once balanced a checkbook and who keeps her own records on a whiteboard with ladybug magnets. Tyler drifting over to ask if I could look at his taxes this year, since you're like a professional and everything, not offering to pay for the service because in this family, my skills are communal property. Aunt Patrice watching me from across the kitchen with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe. Or the careful neutrality of someone who suspects something but hasn't decided what to do with the suspicion. Bria arrived late, her coat dusted with the first snow of the season. She caught my eye across the kitchen island, and she gave me a small nod. Just a nod. No words. But it was the kind of nod that carries the weight of a filing cabinet full of bank statements. The acknowledgement of someone who knows what's in the tote bag by the door, and understands that the next few hours are going to rearrange the family's balance sheet permanently. Dinner was loud in the way all large family dinners are loud. Overlapping voices, the scrape of chairs, the clink of serving spoons against ceramic. Greg told a story about a fishing trip that involved a broken rod and a catfish he claimed weighed 9 pounds. Tyler's girlfriend Jess complimented the sweet potatoes and asked for the recipe, which my mother gave with the graciousness of a woman being interviewed for a lifestyle magazine. My mother held court the way she always does, refilling glasses before they were empty, touching people's shoulders as she passed, laughing at exactly the right volume, at exactly the right moments. She's good at this. She's always been good at the performance of generosity while practicing the mechanics of extraction. What I did next, I'd planned in the time it takes to fold a napkin, but the preparation had taken 15 years. The ask came between the turkey and the pie. My mother stood up, tapped her glass with a butter knife, actually tapped her glass, like a toast at a wedding, like she'd rehearsed this, and said she had an announcement. The room quieted the way rooms do when the person who controls the thermostat speaks. As you all know, this family has always taken care of each other. That's what we do, she said. She paused, smiled, made eye contact with Aunt Connie, then Uncle David, then me. Greg and I have been looking at our retirement situation, and we've realized that with the way costs are going, we're going to need some additional help from family. Nadine? She looked directly at me, and her voice softened into that honey register. We've done the numbers, sweetheart, and with inflation and everything, your rent contribution needs to go up. We're thinking $2,400 a month. And there's also a cost of living adjustment for the last few years that brings your back balance to $86,400. She said this in front of 22 people. She said it the way she said everything, like she was announcing dessert, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like a 31-year-old woman who hasn't lived in that house for 13 years should obviously still be paying rent on a room she no longer occupies. The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet, complicit quiet. The quiet of people who have watched this happen for 15 years and chosen the sweet potatoes. I set my fork down. I placed my napkin on the table, folded once. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted them the way I count everything, not for drama, but because 4 seconds is how long it takes me to verify that my voice will come out level. Mom, I said, before we talk about adjustments, I think everyone at this table should understand where the current payments have been going. I reached into the tote bag beside my chair and set the white binder on the table. It landed next to my plate with a thud that was heavier than 2 inches of paper should produce. But evidence has weight. The room felt it. I opened to the summary page. I read it aloud, in the same voice I use when presenting findings to a judge. Level, specific, no editorializing, no inflection that could be mistaken for accusation. Just the numbers. Since I was 16 years old, I have paid Linda Brewer a total of $172,800 in what I was told were rent and household expense contributions. Every payment has been documented in personal ledgers and cross-referenced with my bank records, copies of which are in tab 1. Not $1 of that money was applied to rent, mortgage, utilities, or any household cost. Instead, the full amount was deposited into a personal retirement savings account at Heartland Credit Union, account ending in 4471, titled Linda and Greg's Retirement Fund, Nadine Contributions. The property's actual mortgage payment is $743 per month, documented in tab 4. Total average household expenses are $1,053 per month. I was paying more than the entire cost of running this household, and the household never saw a cent of it. I turned the binder toward the center of the table. The color-coded tabs were visible. Payment history, bank records, credit union statements, mortgage records, legal research, correspondence. My mother's face did something I'd never seen in 31 years of watching her perform. The hostess smile held for 2 seconds. I counted, and then it went out. The way a bulb goes when the filament finally burns through. Not a collapse. A disconnection. Her hand was still holding the butter knife she'd used to tap the glass, and her knuckles went white around the handle. Nadine. Her voice was different now. Stripped. This is a family matter. This is not the time or the place to. You made it the time, Mom. You stood up in front of everyone at this table and asked me for more. I'm sitting here in front of everyone at this table showing them where it went. Greg shifted in his chair. The leather creaked. Now, Nadine, your mother and I have expenses that you don't understand. Greg, your name is on the account. The co-signer documents are in tab 4. You're welcome to review them at your convenience. Aunt Patrice was the first person to reach for the binder. She opened to the credit union statements and I watched her eyebrows climb her forehead 1 centimeter at a time, the way numbers climb when you're reading a column you didn't expect to be that long. She passed it to Uncle David without a word. Uncle David's jaw tightened. He passed it to Donna. It moved around the table like a collection plate at church, except this time, people were finally seeing what had already been collected. My mother tried 3 more approaches in the next 6 minutes. I watched them the way I watch a subject in a deposition shift strategies when the documentation is irrefutable. First, guilt. After everything I did for you, I raised you alone, Nadine. I kept a roof over your head when your father walked out. I didn't respond. The binder was responding for me. The roof had cost $743 a month, and I'd been paying $1,200. Second, tears. She pressed her cloth napkin to her eyes, not the paper one, the cloth one she saved for holidays, and said, her voice breaking at precisely the right moment, I was saving it for you, sweetheart. It was going to be a surprise for your wedding. I said, the account is in your and Greg's names only. There is no beneficiary designation. There is no transfer on death provision naming me or anyone else. That documentation is in tab 5. Third, recruitment. She looked around the table, her eyes moving from face to face the way a searchlight sweeps a yard, and said, Are you all just going to sit here and let her do this to me? And they did. They sat there, 22 people, and not one of them picked up the butter knife for her. Not one of them said, Nadine, that's enough. The sweet potatoes went cold, the cranberry sauce congealed, and the silence answered her question more completely than any words could have. Tyler's girlfriend, Jess, a woman I'd met exactly twice before, a kindergarten teacher from Worcester with a small tattoo of a daisy on her wrist, looked at Tyler and said, quietly but clearly enough for the table to hear, Did you know about this? Tyler didn't answer. He stared at his plate like the mashed potatoes contained instructions he couldn't find. If you've ever sat in a room where 22 people go quiet, and the silence itself becomes the verdict, hit subscribe. You'll want to hear what happened next. The one person who spoke was Bria. She didn't defend me. She didn't attack my mother. She said, in a voice as level as mine, "Aunt Linda, is the retirement account still open?" My mother didn't answer, which was an answer, the most complete answer she'd given all evening. I closed the binder. I placed it back in the tote bag. I picked up my fork and took a bite of sweet potato casserole. It was cold by then. The marshmallow topping hardened into a sugary crust, but I ate it deliberately, the way you eat when eating is a statement. The act of picking up the fork said, "I'm still here. I'm not leaving in tears. I'm not storming out. I'm just done being the meal." After dinner, the house emptied faster than any Thanksgiving I could remember. Cars pulled out of the gravel driveway in clusters of 2 and 3, headlights sweeping across the yard like people leaving a theater before the credits. Greg went to the basement without speaking. Tyler left through the side door without saying goodbye, Jess's hand on his elbow. Donna and Keith were among the first to leave. Donna paused in the doorway and looked at my mother with an expression that combined pity and arithmetic, and then she was gone. My mother stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes by hand. The dishwasher worked now. Greg had finally fixed it 2 years ago with a part that cost $11. But she washed by hand, the way she does when she needs something to do with her anger. Aggressive scrubbing, water too hot, plates handled like accusations. I'd paid $1,200 the same month that $11 part went in. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt like someone who'd just closed a 15-year audit, exhausted down to the marrow, precise in my conclusions, and aware that the numbers were correct even when I wished they weren't. The case was closed. The loss was real. Both things were true at the same time, and both things lived in the same column. I picked up a dish towel and dried a serving bowl, the big ceramic one with the chip on the rim that had been in the family since before I was born. I set it in the cabinet. My mother didn't speak. Her hands were in the soapy water and her shoulders were pulled in tight, smaller than I'd ever seen her, compressed into a shape I didn't recognize. "Mom," I said, "I'm not going to sue you. I want you to understand that. But the payments stopped today. All of them. Permanently. There is no back balance. There never was." She didn't respond. The water ran. "I've put together a list of financial counselors in the Mansfield area who work on a sliding scale. It's in the back of the binder, in the last tab. If you and Greg need help building a retirement plan based on your actual income, the resources are there. I'll cover the cost of the first 3 sessions." She turned off the water. She didn't look at me. She said, to the window above the sink, "You've always been so cold, Nadine." I reached into the tote bag one more time and pulled out composition notebook number 1. The dollar store marbled cover, the pages curled soft from years in the lockbox. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, lighter than the binder, heavier than anything else I owned. I wasn't cold, Mom. I was counting. I drove back to Columbus that night. 2 hours on I-71 South in the dark, the binder on the passenger seat, the composition notebook in my lap at every red light. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I let the road noise fill the car the way silence fills a conference room after the findings have been read into the record, and the opposing party has no response. The consequences arrived the way they always arrive when the evidence is on paper, quietly, specifically, and without the drama the guilty party had been performing in place of accountability. Aunt Patrice called me the following Monday. She said she'd had no idea about the account. She said she was sorry, not in the vague way people are sorry about weather, but specifically sorry that she'd been sitting at that table for 15 years watching my mother collect from me, and had never once asked where the money was going. I believed her. She'd been watching the performance, not the ledger. Most people do. Uncle David told my mother the following week that he'd be stepping back from holiday hosting duties for a while, which is Midwestern for, "I saw the spreadsheet and I'm not sitting at that table again until the numbers change." Donna called Greg directly and asked him how much of the retirement account was funded by my payments. I don't know what Greg said. I know Donna didn't come to Christmas. I know Keith sent me a card that said, "Respect," and nothing else, which was exactly enough. Tyler texted me in January. 3 words. I didn't know. I texted back 2 words. I know. Then, a week later, a longer message from him. Jess says I should probably talk to someone about how things were growing up. Like a professional. Do you know anyone good? I sent him Dr. Achebe's office number. I told him the first session is the hardest, and the fourth one is when the pattern starts to make sense. He thanked me with a thumbs up emoji, which is more emotional vocabulary than anyone in our family has ever used voluntarily. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Bria drove to Columbus on a Saturday in February. She brought Thai food and a 6-pack of the ginger ale we used to drink at sleepovers when we were kids. She sat on my couch with Pencil the greyhound draped across her feet, and she didn't try to explain my mother, or fix the family, or tell me I should forgive. She said, "You did the right thing, Nadine." And then she said, "That binder was the most terrifying object I have ever seen at a dinner table, and I once watched Uncle David carve a turkey with a hunting knife." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. My mother and I haven't spoken since Thanksgiving. She hasn't called. She hasn't texted. I sent the financial counselor information a second time by certified mail in December, along with a handwritten card that said, "I meant what I said. The offer for 3 sessions stands. I'm not your enemy, Mom. I'm just not your account anymore." The card came back 3 weeks later with "Return to sender," written across the envelope in her block handwriting. I looked at those 4 words for a long time. Return to sender. The final line item in a ledger she's refusing to reconcile. I filed the envelope in the binder, in the correspondence tab, and I closed it. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel free, the way people in movies feel free when they finally stand up to their family. I felt the way you feel at the end of a long, complicated audit, certain of the numbers, uncertain of what they cost you to count. The case was closed, but the loss was real. I'd spent 15 years paying rent on a home that was never really mine, and the price was more than $172,800. The price was a mother who chose a retirement account over her daughter's trust and called it teaching responsibility. Here's what 15 years of double-entry bookkeeping taught me that no classroom ever did. Some people will charge you for the privilege of being exploited, and they'll write the invoice in the language of love. They'll call it family. They'll call it responsibility. They'll call it preparing you for the real world. And you'll pay it, not because you can't do the math, but because you want the arithmetic to work. You want one side of the ledger to say, "She loved me," and the other to say, "And here's the proof." But love doesn't carry a back balance. It doesn't compound interest. And it never, ever shows up as a line item in someone else's retirement fund, with your name in the title, and your money in the principal. That's my story. The composition notebook, the one I started at 16, with the marbled cover and the blue ballpoint and the question, "Is this legal?" on the first page, sits on my desk now. Not in the lockbox. On the desk, next to my monitor and my coffee cup, open to the last page I wrote in. It reminds me every morning that the most important audit I ever conducted was the one where I was both the investigator and the evidence, and that the numbers, in the end, did exactly what Mr. Harmon promised they would. They didn't lie. What about you? Was there a moment when you realized the help you were giving your family wasn't help at all? It was a payment plan for someone else's comfort? Drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.